Slumpbusters. Join me on today's little quick segment here as we preview the Seahawks versus the 49ers. It's going to be Calvin Domingo of the Steezy A Smith YouTube channel. And obviously I didn't expect when we got to this point, the seasons for both teams would look like they did. Certainly as a Niners fan, I'm used to having to battle through the Seahawks having a better record than us most of the time in the division. So it's interesting to be previewing this video from a position of strength. And yet I will tell you this, I don't care if the Seahawks have 3 wins. I don't care if they have 0 wins. As long as number 3 is behind center, I have my reservations about going into this game with a false sense of confidence. How did we get to this point with the Seahawks season? Like, what do you think is the main thing that's holding this team back right now at this point?
Right now, I gotta say the offense. The offense has just been broken. This goes back to the second half of last year, right? We all saw how, when the Seahawks let Russ cook, Seahawks started off 5-0. Then I think it was after Russ started throwing interceptions, he had back-to-back games of 2+ turnovers, one against the Bills. He had 2 picks, 2 fumbles, and then the game after that against the Rams, 2 interceptions, 2 ghastly interceptions. And after that, Pete kind of took the keys away from the Ferrari, as I like to say. And Seattle's defense started stepping it up, but the offense not only sputtered, but just completely was almost non-existent at times in the second half of last year. And we see that going into this year. The team is the worst in football in terms of converting on third down. The Seahawks are the worst in football in terms of time of possession. They haven't won a single time of possession battle in over a year. Every single game this year, they've been crushed in time of possession, haven't been able to run the football. Obviously, Russ missing a couple of games, missing about a month. That didn't really help matters. But it's really a combination of factors, and I feel like with Coach Pete, I just don't know if he's the right fit for this kind of roster moving forward. What he wants to do, the identity that he wants to establish, it's just not there, especially not in this personnel group. And so I think it's also a scenario in which you had 2 guys trying to drive the boat. Coach Pete, Russ, obviously we all know what Russ wants to do. We all know what Coach Pete wants to do. And I feel like they've been able to get away with not being on the same page, per se. This year, I just feel like with the lack of talent across the board, some issues are more magnified than ever. And Russ, I'm not saying he's not top 5 anymore, but maybe, a combination of him getting older, yes, the injury and maybe just the fact that he's not as mobile as he once was. Maybe he's not that surefire top 5 definitive, elite type of quarterback in the National Football League anymore. That could possibly be a conversation to be had. So, there's a lot of ways to attack that question, but I think those are some of the biggest things that are hindering this football team right now.
What percentage chance would you say that Pete Carroll is the head coach of the Seahawks in 2022?
I'm going to go 40% in that yes, and then 60% no, he's not going to be the head coach. I feel like if worse comes to worse, or at the very least, if he's not going to be relieved of his head coaching duties, at least strip him of some of the power that he has, because he does have a lot of personnel say, he does have a lot of organizational say, and he only answers to Jody Allen, the current owner of the Seattle Seahawks. John Schneider is the GM in name, but at the end of the day, he has veto power. And so when it comes to drafting, when it comes to, a lot of the personnel moves in that department, Pete Carroll's responsible for that. And so at least strip him of that power, and if that were to happen, I could see him remaining as a head coach, but with less power in Seattle.
Now, I know before the season started and we were previewing the NFC West together, we were talking about Shane Waldron coming over, and you were very high on Shane. But we've noticed a trend with offensive coordinators in Seattle that when the team starts to struggle, particularly later in the season, the OC gets a lot of the blame and Russell Wilson tends to go off scot-free. Do you still have confidence in Shane Waldron?
Not too much, but I definitely do. He is a first-year offensive coordinator. He's never been an offensive coordinator in the league. And I just feel like Coach Pete still has so much autonomy, not over just the defense, but also the offense. And a lot of the times the offense just reeks of Coach Pete. Like, you just know that that's Coach Pete. You're not seeing some of these concepts that Shane Waldron is capable of bringing over. We saw some flashes in week 1 against the Colts. We've seen, flashes throughout the course of the season. I just feel like Pete's kind of holding him back, and Pete's kind of afraid to kind of unleash him. Or it could just be that Pete's frustrated and that I don't know. I just feel like you said, there's a common theme. There's offensive coordinator after coordinator after OC after OC after OC, and yet Pete never gets the blame. But this time around, I just think that he needs to be held accountable for all these moves that he's not making.
Speaking of moves that they've made, Jamal Adams, how are you feeling about that acquisition at this point in time? Do you think that you can still justify it, or now looking at what that draft position is looking like, where have you wavered on that?
It's tough to say. I love Jamal Adams as a player. I'm not going to backtrack and say, I wish we didn't make that trade. But I think for me, looking back, the price that Seattle paid to acquire Jamal, that's still something I can't sit well with. And to me, that's another move that reeks of Coach Pete Carroll. You know, he's the oldest head coach in the National Football League, right? And so that being said, he's not in any position to rebuild. He wants to win now. He doesn't care if he's giving up draft picks now. And so obviously no one saw Seattle picking, well, if the draft were to start today, Seattle would be picking 5th overall. But actually, no, the Jets have that first round picking, so we don't even have a first round pick to play for. It's definitely hard to justify that, especially if Seattle does end up giving the Jets a top 5 pick. But I feel like Jamal's young enough. He's 24, 25. I don't know if this is exactly the best thing, but he does have 2 interceptions this year. No sacks, 2 interceptions. And so he's definitely, I feel like, improved in that regard, or at least done a little bit more to silence the critics as far as, you know, the people saying that he can't catch and whatnot. He still doesn't have the best hands, but he's had 2 interceptions his entire career before this season. And so I think that definitely speaks for something, and I look forward to seeing them grow.
Well, that's another part of the argument there. Obviously, you guys don't have any draft selections, and that's why people are looking at Russell Wilson and saying, man, can I get 3 first-round picks for Russ, 4 first-round picks? Same question as Pete. What percentage chance that Russell Wilson is a starting Seattle quarterback in 2022?
I'm going to say 50. I'm going to say 50%. I just feel like he's more willing to stay in Seattle if Coach Pete isn't there. Now, we don't know what's going to happen, and so I think it's entirely contingent on what happens with Pete. I think if Pete's there, Russ is out. I think if Pete isn't there, I think Russ, gives Seattle another shot, another chance without head coach Pete Carroll, at least for a year. Have the team rebuild a roster more in favor towards Russ. Bring in an offensive-minded coach, a guy that can maximize all the talent on his football team, a guy that could, utilize the talent properly. I mean, it seems like the ingredients are there for a passing attack, or at least an offense led by its passing attack. And so, I'm going to say 50-50.
Obviously, Russ came out with a list of teams that he would accept a trade to this past offseason, which I believe included the Raiders, Saints. I want to say Miami was on that short list. Which team do you think would make the biggest play for Russell Wilson, knowing that he's probably not just going to accept the trade to just any team?
A lot of teams have been brought up. Miami, I feel like if they were going to put their hat in the running for anybody, I think it'd be Deshaun Watson. But I think they like what Tua is doing right now. So I'm not going to go Miami. The Raiders, it seemed like a very intriguing option, but Derek Carr is having, a pretty great season. And so I don't think they'd be a team that's realistic. I think the New Orleans Saints, we don't know what they're going to get out of Taysom Hill. Jameis Winston will be coming off a torn ACL. Trevor Siemian obviously isn't the answer. Sean Payton is also nearing, or is probably closer to the end of his career than the beginning of it. He does have an elite defense in place. He has Alvin Kamara. If Michael Thomas does come back, you still have him. And so I feel like they're really just missing a quarterback. And I know Seattle would probably hate to deal to another NFC team. Ideally, it'd be an AFC team that they trade Russell Wilson to if it gets to that point. But I just feel like with the Saints, they're desperate, and they've given up draft picks before. They've made big moves before. And so I can definitely see the Saints making a play.
Okay, let's finally get into this game here. So as much as it pains me to say this, Russell Wilson, the Seattle Seahawks, they own the 49ers. 15-4 career record Russell Wilson has against the 49ers. Almost doesn't even sound real to say that when I think about, is this a rivalry? I mean, it feels like one of the best rivalries in sports when both teams are really good. You go back to that 2019 season, how both games came down to basically a play at the end. You go back to the 2013 seasons with Jim Harbaugh, and again, plays coming down to the very end here. But yeah, Russ has a 34-9 touchdown interception ratio in these games. He's completing about 64% of his passes. Obviously, they did play earlier in the year too, when both teams were healthy. That was pre-Russ injury at that point. They went into halftime tied 7-7, and a game changer was Jimmy Garoppolo went down with that calf strain, meaning Trey Lance had to come into it. What do you make of Seattle's chances in this game? They are currently 3.5-point underdogs at home.
Nothing this season has really given me the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the Seahawks winning football games. And I understand, these are two different things, but, I've also been placing a lot of bets, on the Seahawks this year, and I've lost a lot of money. So that's definitely hurt, the pockets department. And that definitely hasn't given me confidence. I mean, I know you guys are going to be without Debo. I think Fred Warner is probably not going to play. But the way that Elijah Mitchell has been running, I have him on, I don't know how many fantasy teams, but he's been running all over teams the last couple of games. You guys are riding high. You guys beat the Vikings. You guys have beaten some quality opposition. And so even without a guy like a Deebo Samuel or a Fred Warner, I mean, you guys still have so many pieces on both sides. I mean, George Kittle, he was real quiet last game. Brandon Ayuk's been stepping up as of late. Obviously, Nick Bosa's still on the other side of that defense for you guys. And so Seattle, we struggled at home. You know, I don't think we have, if I'm not mistaken, we don't have more than one win at home this year, if we even do, because we have a victory, against the Jaguars. That's our only home victory this year. We've been very uncharacteristic when playing at home this year, and so we just haven't had that advantage. But the offense just looks so broken. I mean, until the offense can really get themselves out of that slump, it's hard for me to really go with Seattle. I mean, I'm actually going to be picking against Seattle. We'll probably get into our scores in a little bit, but I don't have a lot of hope in Seattle moving forward.
I feel compelled that I have to select the Niners in this game. Obviously, they are the betting favorites. They're the team coming in with the 3-game winning streak. I don't feel great about it because, like I said, you could have the Detroit Lions record, and I would still not feel good about a 49ers Seattle's game, to be honest. So I'm going to say, give me a 28-17 game score, San Francisco.
Okay, San Fran. That's fair. I think for me, I'm going to go with San Fran 26, Seattle 23.
Okay, 26, a little bit of an unusual number. I'm kind of curious how we get to that point, but I'm with it. Hey, we both agree on the Niners, so that's definitely a good point for me to be at. All right, guys. Well, definitely, hey, appreciate you coming on with me, Calvin. Always a great time talking to you. Obviously, the most rational Seahawks fan I know out there in the NFL fan bases there. So we appreciate you taking the time to come into enemy territory here. Check him out, Steezy A Smith on IG, Steezy A Smith on YouTube. Of course, follow us at Slumpbuster Podcast on IG, at Slumpbuster Pod on Twitter. From Juju Talk Sports, stay safe, happy, and healthy, and we'll see you on the next one.